Born on November 29, 1898 in Belfast, Ireland, C.S. Lewis is well known as a children's author, although he contributed to various genres of literature, including science fiction and religious texts.
Inspired by Tolkien's The Hobbit, Lewis decided to write his own children's fantasy book during a time when fantasy was difficult to publish. However, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was published in 1950. Tolkien disliked it intensely, feeling that Lewis's fictional world of Narnia was too underdeveloped and the novel itself too hastily written. Lewis intended to end the Chronicles of Narnia after just one novel, but its tremendous success impressed Lewis's publisher so much that Lewis was begged to make the novel into a series. The series contained 7 books and took just a few years to write, but were released at a rate of 1 per year for continuity purposes. The Chronicles of Narnia series concluded with The Last Battle, published in 1956. It earned the Carnegie Medal for an outstanding book for children written in English. While Lewis's literary life proved to be a great success, his personal life was much less so. He experienced a great deal of loss by this point in his life, much of it early on. While Lewis's father outlived his mother, he spent most of his youth off at boarding schools, away from home. However, Lewis remained close with his brother Warren and found many friends later at Oxford. A bachelor, Lewis spent decades caring for the mother of Patty Moore, his roommate at Oxford. Moore died while serving in World War I, and the two had made a promise to look after the other's mother if they are killed in combat. Some doubted the true nature of the relationship between Mrs. Moore and Lewis, suspecting a romance. Not even Lewis's brother knew the truth. In 1948, Lewis began writing to Helen Joy Davidman Gresham, a fellow writer 15 years Lewis's junior. They met in 1952, coincidentally just 1 year after Mrs. Moore died at a nursing home. He and Gresham married in 1956, 2 years after Gresham had divorced her husband. The couple married on Gresham's deathbed at Wingfield Hospital, certain that she would die of bone cancer. Perhaps the magic of new love, Gresham spontaneously recovered in 1957. In July 1958, the couple enjoyed a vacation in Ireland for 10 days. Upon learning that the cancer returned in 1960, they traveled to Greece that April. Lewis's wife died 3 months later, prompting him to write A Grief Observed, one of his most famous novels. He took care of Gresham's sons, Douglas and David, until his own death. On November 22, 1963, Lewis died at his home, a place nicknamed the Kilns. A funeral was held at Holy Trinity Church, which he first took communion at in 1931. Warren Lewis composed the writing on his brother's gravestone, "Men must endure their going hence." Warren died 10 years later, and shares the stone with his brother. In Lewis's honor, the church posted a plaque where the Lewis brothers usually sat, and installed a new window featuring the magical world of Narnia.
Tolkien's trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, was becoming popular around the time the Inklings stopped meeting. By 1965, The Lord of the Rings was translated into Dutch, Swedish, and Polish due to the high demand of readers who communicated in different languages. During this time, Ace Brooks started making unauthorized paperback editions of the trilogy without Tolkien's approval. Paperback versions of The Lord of the Rings were non-existent.
As a result, when Ace Books made them, they sold quickly and made a lot of money because they were cheaper. The inexpensive copies made by Ace Books were distributed to bookstores and colleges across the country. Ace Books claimed the copies were legal because the copyright laws didn't protect foreign authors. Unfortunately, they were right and found the loophole in the law. A little after Ace Books started publishing their paperback, another publishing company, Ballantine Books, made an authorized copy trying to compete against Ace Books' edition. In the stories by Ballantine Books, readers were told that they should give credit to the author and they should basically not purchase any copies made by Ace Books. The science fiction writers of America and Tolkien fans encouraged people to buy the authorized copy and forced Ace Books to pay royalties to Tolkien for using his works and eventually stopped them from printing any more copies after they sold out of their current stock. Even with this downfall, the sales from The Lord of the Rings were high enough to ensure the well-being of the Tolkien family for the rest of their lives. With this new source of money, Tolkien didn't have to worry about getting tenure from Oxford, where he held the position of Merton Professorship of English Language and Literature. He was free to do whatever he pleased. Without the financial obligations, he wanted to continue his writing. In particular, he wanted to finish one tale he had been working on for 40 years, which he started at the end of World War I, called The Silmarillion. This was a very difficult task for him to tackle because his story and his views changed over the years he was working on the book. His son Christopher asked, how would he bring 40 years' worth of thinking about and discovering and modifying and seeing new sides of motivations and characters into a single version? The work seemed impossible to complete because parts were so different and no one could really piece all of them together to make a sensible story. Tolkien was beginning to become afraid that he would never see the end of the Silmarillion, and made a deal with his son Christopher to finish the book if he died before he could complete it himself.
Some people who knew him well thought that he didn't really, have said that he didn't really want to finish the Silmarillion, suggesting even that at some level he felt that to finish the Silmarillion would be finishing his life. I personally don't think that at all. I don't think there's any real evidence for it. I think he deeply wanted to finish it, but could too large a task, too tired.
Meanwhile, in 1959, Tolkien retired from being a professor at Oxford to help his wife Edith. She was struggling with arthritis and had digestive problems. He spent a lot of time visiting his friends and grandchildren. He also spent a considerable amount of time responding to and talking with his fans. He would talk to them on the phone and through letters. The Tolkiens took many vacations to Bournemouth, a town on the southern coast of England, which they very much enjoyed. In 1968, J.R.R. Tolkien moved to Bournemouth from Headington, with Edith by her request. She wanted to escape to somewhere less intellectual and somewhere that was friendly and relaxing. When the Tolkiens moved, they went into seclusion from fans and had their telephone number and personal information kept out of phone books. On November 22, 1971, Edith passed away, and the Merton College of Oxford University welcomed Tolkien back to move in as a resident honorary fellow, where he lived in a college-owned house. In 1972, Tolkien was given an honorary doctorate of letters from Oxford. On September 1, 1973, Tolkien went to go visit his friends back in Bournemouth. During this trip, he became ill and was taken to the hospital. He was diagnosed as having an acute bleeding gastric ulcer, which led to a chest infection. The combination caused the death of J.R.R. Tolkien on September 2, 1973. He was buried alongside Edith in a Catholic cemetery in Wolvercote, a village in Oxford. Tolkien had the name Baron inscribed on his tombstone and Luthien on Edith's. This was a reference to a love story in the Silmarillion in which the human Baron falls in love with an elf princess after she dances and sings for him. The inspiration for the story came from Tolkien's own experience with Edith, and in both stories the man wasn't approved by the woman's family, Tolkien's Catholicism being the cause for it. Upon his father's death, Christopher respected his wishes, and in 1977 the Silmarillion was published by George Allen and Unwin. Christopher went ahead and published some more of his father's collection, including the Unfinished Tales in Numenor and Middle-earth, and the 12 volumes of the history of Middle-earth. All were unexpectedly successful, and Tolkien's legacy continued to live on.
Unlike Lewis and Tolkien, Owen Barfield wasn't a professor at Oxford. Although he did graduate from Oxford, he spent a lot of time working as a solicitor at his family firm.
By 1950, Barfield was 52. He was married to his wife Maud Dowie and adopted 3 children, one of which had its mother killed during the German air raids of World War II. They lived in Orchard View, Kent, located in South England. While working for the family firm in London, Barfield didn't have the time to follow his true passions of literature and poetry. He did manage to write Saving the Appearance in 1957. Once 1959 came around, he retired and continued advancing his writings. The best source to find out all about Barfield and his good friend Lewis is to read Barfield's autobiographical novel, This Ever Diverse Pair, from 1950. Within the novel, Barfield writes about his struggles with maintaining his responsibilities at the firm and keeping up with his passions. Lewis and Barfield were very close, and Barfield's daughter Lucy inspired Lewis to write The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, naming one of the main characters after her. Lewis sent the completed draft to Lucy and wrote, "I wrote this story for you." When the book was published, the letter became his dedication. The third book from the Chronicles of Narnia, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, was dedicated to another one of Barfield's children, Geoffrey. As a retired man, the philosophies of Samuel Taylor Coleridge captivated Barfield. Coleridge's inspiration over Barfield led him to write a lengthy study called What Coleridge Thought, published in 1971. This study goes into great detail about the philosophies of imagination and fancy. This is a breakdown of how the brain finds inspiration to create poetry. The brain's inspiration is divided in the imagination, which is the center source for all true absolute creation. Fancy is just a lower level for the creativity. This part is imperfect because it is influenced by other ideals, which Barfield tried to avoid the most in his writing. Worlds Apart, Unancestral Voice, Speaker's Meaning, and History, Guilt, and Habit were all published after Barfield's retirement. During the same time, Barfield held lectures all over the United States, including several trips as a visiting professor at Brandeis University and at Wheaton College, Illinois, where to this day his works are held in the archives along with C.S. Lewis and other works by British authors. Barfield lived the rest of his life doing lectures and spending time with his family. On December 14, 1997, Barfield passed away. From 1950 till the end of his days, Barfield truly got to fulfill his love for literature, ideals, and poetry. His earlier life may have been filled with legal battles, but he will always be remembered as the first and last Inkling.
Fruit in a blossom, and petals in a seed, reeds in a river or a bed, music in a reed, stars in the firmament, shining in the night, sun in the galaxy, and planet in this light, bones in the rosy blood, like land in the sea, marrow in a skeleton, an eye in me.